Now, Executive Suite with WPRI.com reporter Ted Nisi.
Money, capital, seed funding, whatever you call it, early investment is crucial for startups, and a new group is filling the void for Rhode Island life science companies. The Ocean State Angels say the industry has untapped potential here, and they want to unlock it with seed money, early stage funding, and mentoring. This week on Executive Suite, the father-son co-founders of the Ocean State Angels, Michael and Tom Ehrlich. Plus, Providence's cable car cinema has been screening independent films for nearly 4 decades, but it's facing an existential threat because of the shift to digital projection. Last month, the cable car launched a Kickstarter campaign to raise nearly $50,000 to upgrade its facility. Will it work? On the second half of Executive Suite, cable car cinema co-owner Daniel Kamiel. Welcome to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nisi, and you see the amateur hour it is when you take a newspaper guy out and put him on television. That should have been Timothy Ehrlich, of course. I don't know why I said Tom in the booth there, and my deepest apologies. I hope you won't walk out on me now to kick off the show.
We're here now.
You're stuck, really. We've locked the doors.
Right.
So, all right, I'm going to start actually with Dr. Ehrlich.
Sure.
Dr. Ehrlich, you're the Surgeon-in-Chief of the Department of Orthopedics at Rhode Island Hospital in Miriam. You're also Chairman of Orthopedics at Brown.
Right.
You've been in medicine a long time. What's your specialty? What do you specialize in?
I'm a pediatric orthopedic surgeon, and I've been down in Rhode Island for 23 years. I was invited to be surgeon-chief and chairman of the department, originally at Rhode Island Hospital, before they all merged. And I came down from Mass General and Harvard Medical School, where I was in charge of children's orthopedics there. So I've been at this for quite a while.
Quite a few years.
Yeah.
And Tim, you're a partner in the corporate partnering group at the prominent law firm, I'd say Gunderson Detmer. What do you do up there?
So the firm generally works with emerging growth technology companies and venture capital firms. We're one of the only firms in the country that focuses exclusively on that space. And I work with all of those companies and venture capital firms, either starting and growing companies, investing in them, selling them off, taking them public. And so we do basically soup to nuts, helping those companies from inception to exit. Which is a perfect transition to the Ocean State Angels. You guys have been getting a lot of buzz. You spoke at the Chamber Breakfast a few weeks back to about 400 business leaders in Rhode Island, and it's very interesting. I want to start off with just, Tim, I'm going to put this to you. What's the Ocean State Angels? What's the elevator pitch? So Ocean State Angels is the newest angel investment group in Rhode Island that's focused exclusively on nurturing, investing in, and growing life science businesses here in Rhode Island. So we think there's a lot of opportunity to not really recreate the wheel, but rather to focus the efforts that are already going on in Rhode Island and the capital sources to grow businesses here focused in life sciences. And across that range, there's a lot of different companies we're looking at, biotech, potentially specialty pharma, diagnostics, medical devices. There's a lot of ample and fertile technology here and people who want to create companies. So our goal really is to pull together the resources that are already here, both capital, mentoring, and technology and entrepreneurs, and help grow them, and as long as they stay in Rhode Island, try and keep them here and grow that part of the sector.
So life sciences covers fairly wide spectrum of different companies, as you said there, medical devices, pharma, et cetera, and you'll focus on all of that with the Angels.
Correct. We don't want to be too specific. We're already focusing because we're looking just at life sciences and also just in companies that want to grow in Rhode Island. So we're within that field, we're going to look broadly across, including healthcare IT. So we really want to try and grow this part of the segment of the economy and not be too specific within that segment.
Doctor, where did the idea come from? As you said, you've been in this a long time. Maybe you could have started it 30 years ago, but here it is today. What actually got this off the ground?
We have a very large orthopedic research lab. In fact, we're, in terms of NIH funding at Lifespan, we are in the top 5 in the nation. So it's a very viable, exciting place to be. And many of the scientists in our lab have started patenting their inventions. People who are working on treatments for arthritis. There are people working on treatments to keep the prostheses from loosening. We have ways to treat some orphan diseases in joints, or maybe treat patients who don't grow. So there's lots of things going on. And so when after we had patented these things, I started looking around to find out, is there some way that we could turn them into companies? And to my surprise, when I checked and started looking about 2 years ago, Rhode Island Hospital Lifespan has built an enormous research portfolio. They get about $60 to $80 million a year of outside funding. But as of 2 years ago, they produced, in the last 23 years I've been here, there were only 2 companies, and those 2 didn't return very much money. So that there was obviously some kind of disconnect between what Timothy calls the valley of death, between the scientists. You have brilliant scientists, and we have one guy who's the #1 ligament researcher in North America, and another guy who's the #2 college researcher in North America. And yet, none of these, there was no mechanism to turn these into companies. Now, we're also working with Brown, and Brown has some very good translational research through Katie Gordon. But it was a lost cause. And as I started wandering around, I found there were a lot of other people doing it. So who could I turn to? But I have a son whose company is the #1 company in the state, in the nation, in terms of new startups. And I think Timothy was getting tired. He'll talk about the Massachusetts market being oversaturated. So we wanted to get together and see if there was some way that we could help these very nascent companies get started. I have another son who's a venture capitalist in San Francisco, but the companies they're interested in are companies that are already underway, you know, where they're going to get a big return early. And so we got together, and we asked a lot of friends who I know who are philanthropic, and weren't necessarily going into this for to make money, although they wouldn't object. and some doctors at the hospital who were interested in other friends, and the one caveat that we had was that Rhode Island's been very nice to my wife Nancy and I in the 23 years we've been here. They really adopted us, and so that we thought, seeing all the some of the abrupt false starts and stops on the economic frontier, that if we did this as a private thing, and ultimately with help from all the other things, that maybe we could help the state too. And so one of the guidelines is that we're not investing in companies that won't stay in Rhode Island for at least 5 years.
At least 5 years.
That's the
we'll talk much more about that. We have to take a break. When we come back, more on the Ocean State Angels and what they're planning to do for Rhode Island's life sciences sector. Stick with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nisi, and I'm joined by Dr. Michael Ehrlich, a well-known orthopedic surgeon, leads the Brown and Lifespan Rhode Island Hospital departments on that, and his son Timothy Ehrlich, who is a lawyer with the prominent firm Gunderson Detmer up in Boston, and they are the co-founders of the Ocean State Angels, which is what we're talking about today. So, Tim, how does a company end up in the Ocean State Angels pool, and what does that bring to them? What does that give to them?
Sure. So it's a great question. A lot of companies are asking, so how do I pitch Ocean State Angels. What we've done is what many other angel funds have done is we've tried to create a pretty streamlined process for companies that are looking for funding that are within our investment criteria, which are fairly straightforward. They have to be a life science company, they're generally early stage, and they're looking to either grow or locate their business in Rhode Island for some period of time, like we were saying. They go to our website, oceanstateangels.com. There's an application process that we try to get everyone into so that all the investors can look at the same thing.
So as simple as that. Go
as
on
simple
the website
as that, yeah.
Company, yep.
Now, there's two different ways companies usually come to us. One is there'll be companies that hear about the fund and will apply looking for funding, maybe just cold. A lot of the deals that we look at now are coming from our own networks, whether it's from within the hospital, from Brown, from Slater, or even companies, for example, that I might work with as a lawyer that I know are looking for funding and sort of fit that criteria, or will be referred by other investors in our group, which is usually one of the best ways to do it. You know, it's just like any introduction. It's great to have sort of somebody walk you in and say, here's why I think this makes sense for Ocean State Angels. So they apply. It's no more than a 5-page application. We tell them exactly the information we want them to share. It then goes before our screening committee. We have 3 members that look at all the applications that have come in by the deadline for our next investment meeting. And then if they make it through that process, they get presented to the whole group, the whole investment group at one of our meetings. And that's where they make their pitch, so to speak, for funding. We have quarterly meetings right now. The goal is to increase those meetings as we see more deals and more opportunities. But that's just sort of initially as we started out. And during those meetings, at that time, we'll seek input from the investors, both in terms of their interest, level of interest, and whether or not it makes sense to go forward. We also, during that process, I should mention, have a scientific advisory board that is really world-class. It's really a number of endowed professors and chairs from departments here in Rhode Island. Initially, potentially we'll go outside there, but for the most part right now it's Rhode Island doctors who help work with the companies on the front end, both looking at the technology, evaluating the clinical use and the clinical application, potentially sometimes helping them see things that maybe they hadn't seen before, and also helping the investors assess the technology and really the applications. And those people also present at the investment meeting. So they're really involved and integrated into the process early on to help it really understand the science. Because that's, in some cases, that's really can be a hurdle for some people.
Sure. And I know the meetings began in the fall. Have you made investments yet? Where does that process stand now?
So we had 2 companies present in the fall. We had another company present in January, and we're currently looking into that company right now. We're in due diligence on that company. So we found one already that a lot of the investors were very excited about. We're pursuing that as a potential investment right now, and also trying to actually pull together a little syndicate of funds to potentially invest. And it's a Rhode Island-based business and in the healthcare IT space. So it's very exciting. We're like a startup. We're like any startup where, having worked with many of them, I can tell you, it's never going to be perfect from day one. But you use the famous word of pivoting. I'm sure you've heard that in this show many times, where we've set out, we've got a good idea, we've got a good process, and we're sort of working through that now as we grow and as we get new members and look at new companies. So it's been really exciting.
And Dr. Ehrlich, there's so much talk right now about the business climate in Rhode Island and public policy. Do you see any, as you begin to look at this and your own background in the medical field, do you see anywhere that state government or even local government could make it easier for these sorts of companies to thrive?
You've hit it right on the ball. We were discussing this with some government officials yesterday, and one way that most states have to encourage people to invest in this, because remember, these really are startups. You have somebody who has a brilliant idea. They start doing it in the lab, and then they start doing it on animals and get results. Now, there's a big gap from that to people, distance, and so there's some leap of faith. You're trusting to their genius, and that's how the really important discoveries come along. Well, because this is risky, most states have an angel investment credit, which they give you, so that in this current company we're looking at, if the people invested, they could get a tax credit, so then they could double the size of their investment, because we're not a huge organization. But unfortunately, the legislature, in trying to do away with loopholes, made it impossible for individuals, and we're not a bunch of companies pulled together. We're individual investors, so that they can't take the advantage of that. And so that's the kind of thing that wouldn't cost the state a lot of money at all, and would very conceivably double the amount of investment that could go in. And because there are several small companies in Rhode Island that are in the angel business, but a lot of the money has fled to Florida because of state taxes and things like that. There's not money pouring over the dam, as you might realize. And so this kind of thing would help. The other thing that would help would be giving money to the Slater Fund and to the STAC grants. You know, they do give some money, but it's not enough to really build an industry. And in putting this together, Tim and I realized that if we can create a certain number of companies, or set up a system with warehousing or outside laboratories where people could start, but they don't have a lot of money to start doing this, we could create a population of trained investigators who'd be able to move from company to company, or trained lab scientists, so that we really would have the makings of a biotech industry.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for this segment, but thank you both so much for coming in. When we come back, we'll talk about the cable car cinema and their fight to survive into the digital era. Stick with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nisi, and my guest for this segment is Daniel Kamiel. He's co-owner, along with his wife, of the Cable Car Cinema in Providence, independent theater I bet a lot of people know. And Daniel, the cable car's been around since 1976, but for those who aren't familiar with it, I know Entertainment Weekly once called it one of the 10 best cinemas in America. What's different about the cable car from your average showcase?
Well, it's the difference between going to a mom and pop shop and going to a kind of corporate, I guess, cinema. You know, we tend to think that our cinema is a little bit more interesting. We serve beer and wine. We serve high-end kind of chocolates and sandwiches and salads, and you get to walk in and buy a ticket and say hi to the owner. And so it's a different kind of experience. Different kind of feeling.
Yeah. Different movies. I saw Page One, the New York Times documentary there, which was
right
so
up
good.
your alley.
Sat in a couch, which is not something you always get at the big theaters.
And that David Carr is sort of interesting.
It's crazy. I recommend the movie to everyone. You and your wife Emily bought the cable car in 2008. That's quite a project, and that was quite a year to take over an independent cinema. What made you decide to do that?
My wife and I had owned another cinema in another part of the state called the Revival House, and we had
down in Westerly, right?
It was down in Westerly, yeah. And we had bought an old Victorian building and lived upstairs, and created a small little cinema downstairs. And in about 2007, we ended up selling that business along with the property. And so we were looking for something to do. She went back to graduate school. I went to graduate school, and were living in Providence, and we had heard that the cable car could possibly be for sale. So we approached the owner at the time, who was ready to sort of, he had been doing it since the 70s, so he was ready to, I think, pass it on. And
so you're really only the second set of owners, because it was a family, I believe, the first generation.
Yeah, the Bilodeaus were the first family.
All right, I want to get right to this campaign you're doing. It's really fascinating. It's a Kickstarter campaign, and you're trying to raise $48,500 by March 31st. And the reason is, as you say on the website, and you can Google Kickstarter cable car, and you'll find it. I'm sure there's other ways to get there too. And here's a video actually that you guys put up, which is terrific, sort of a parody of the anxiety commercials about how people will be sad if there's no cable car. And that's the question, no cable car. And you're saying that's kind of the threat right now. What are you raising this money for? What needs to be done?
So specifically what's going on, and this is happening in cinemas across the country, 35 millimeter, no one shoots digital still, photos on 35 millimeter anymore. So the studios, 20th Century Fox, Disney,
the big
all the major,
titans,
the big, they essentially are not going to be making prints anymore, which is how we've been showing films forever. And so they are essentially asking all of the theaters to buy new equipment, and they're going to send their films. They're not actually films anymore. They'll be digital files that are in a hard drive that we put into the sort of, what do we call it, a server, and it gets ingested. So they're really, it's really a big computer with a light source.
You go from a mechanical,
exactly.
you know,
It's
what
the
the
analog,
old school.
It's the analog transition into the digital. And everyone, you know, the bigger theaters were subsidized by the studios, and, you know, their business model doesn't really take into consideration a 100-seat cinema in a small market. So, which is why we started the Kickstarter campaign. And what has been really lovely about it is that we have had 450 backers thus far, ranging from a person who has donated $1, who has worked at Taco Bell, to you know, someone who sits on the board at Brown. So it's a real reflection of the community in the sense that, you know, we have a wide spectrum of people participating. And to me, that's what makes the cinema important, is it's really a meeting place for a community of all kinds. And so,
place you see movies too you might not see at the bigger theater. I mean, Page One, that was the only place I saw to see it.
Yeah, I mean, essentially everything that we show, generally, we're the only place, sometimes either New York, Los Angeles, or Providence. You know, we show some pretty, you know, unusual, interesting things.
And I looked this morning, you've got 11 days to go as of right now when we're speaking. You had a bit more than $37,000 raised, which is pretty impressive. You still need another $11,000 by the end of this month. Do you think you can get there?
I think we can get there. I'm hoping that the community, you know, continues to support us in the way that they have. The way that Kickstarter works, I don't know if people know this, but you know, you set a goal for yourself, and in our case, it's $48,500. If by March 31st, which when our campaign ends, we don't get to our goal, we get none of the money. So actually, none of the pledges that have been pledged will actually get processed until the end of the campaign. So please pitch in, because then we don't get any of the money, and it'll be difficult for us.
And of course, people, the way Kickstarter works, people donating certain amounts, it's almost like a pledge drive on PBS. You can get a gift or a sponsorship things, and people can find all that on the Kickstarter site. I'm wondering, let's say this goes fine, the digital transition, and you get the money you need, and you're able to do that. How about just generally keeping independent cinemas as a viable business in the age of Netflix and digital and so much media? Are you having trouble bringing an audience in, or is there a new appreciation? What are you seeing out there?
That is a really interesting question, and one that my wife and I discuss all the time.
And I asked you it with 20 seconds left.
Yeah, and what is the value of a cinema when you can essentially look at everything on your phone? And I guess our retort to that is what makes a place like the cable car important is you see it in a group setting with community, and we do sort of special events, things like today we're actually doing a documentary called Addiction Incorporated, that's with, you know, that we're doing with a local nonprofit.
All right, that's all the time we have. Daniel Kamiel from the Cable Car Cinema, and I want to thank the Ocean State Angels co-founders Timothy and Michael Ehrlich at the beginning of the show. See you next week on Executive Suite.